Hurling on Off the Ball.
With Board Gosh Energy. Hurling. It's anyone's game.
All right, I am delighted to say our next guest is Dr. Eamon O'Shea, and we get to talk hurling for the next while. Eamon, good afternoon, good evening to you. How are you?
Hi, Ger.
How's it going?
Good.
Do you think about the All-Ireland hurling final this week the same way you would have done when you were involved at management level with Tipperary, or do you get to just relax and enjoy it now?
Yeah, just enjoy it now. Just another game. Yeah, it's very different when you're involved. You're a little bit detached from it, but still, it's a great weekend. It's a good weekend. You know what I mean? You'll be excited, a little bit excited, but not a bit detached at the same time.
Because John Kiley during the week was saying that he loves the training. Every time he gets into the car to go and spend time in the company of the players is great, but on match days there's no enjoyment. You're at work. Was that your experience or similar to it?
Yeah, when you're with the group, it's much easier because it's you're working all the time. You're trying to prove things, or you're trying to just dealing with the minute to minute issues of the training session, and that's the enjoyment you get from it. I mean, kind of one of the things about training teams and being involved with teams is you get to see people working hard at their craft or getting better, or trying to do things that you're interested in, and you see a lot of that, and that's the real enjoyment out of it. The match days are a totally different job. I mean, I always separate the match days from the prep. The match days is showtime. It's showtime, and that has its nice things too. But the actual act of trying to be better is a different kind of experience, and it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, they're totally different experiences the way you've described them there. One is full of adrenaline and reacting, and the other one is long-term, slow, considered planning. Yeah.
And you get to see people potentially often, trying to do things, and you can see where they're trying to go with things, and maybe getting frustrated where it's going, and try to address these issues, or they're trying to address these issues. And you can actually see people trying to perfect either the game plan or what's in their own head about how to play and how to get better. And that's in itself is a reward. Sometimes it's not obviously the same reward as winning in All Ireland, but it's a question of people just trying to be better. And so when people talk about elite, sometimes elite gets thrown around, but I always, like, elite can happen in any part of your life. You're trying to be a better parent, or a better father, or a better shopkeeper, or a better economist. You know what I mean? You're trying to be better. Sometimes we use elite as if it's sort of distant, sort of perfection word, but that's what you see sometimes. You're hoping to see anyway. You don't always get it, but you're hoping to see people wanting to strive to be that little bit better. If you get that every day, you're in a great environment.
I'd love to talk to you a bit more about the environment and the creation of it. Before I do, was there, in retrospect, when you look back at being both a manager and a coach, which was the bit that made you happiest? You should do probably as little looking back as you can, to be honest. But if you do look back, the coach is obviously one where it takes you into, so you're working much more closer with the person in the terms of the act of the game, the process of the game, the technicalities of the game. The manager is a little bit different. You're standing back another little bit, and you're holding a lot more balls in your hand, because in a sense, you're having that conversation with a number of different people. Very often as a manager, it's been on the team or off the team, you know what I mean, or and so on sometimes. But with a coach, whether it's individually or collectively, in a sense, there's a more of a shared kind of experience. With a manager, it's less shared, you know what I mean, because you make the final decision, whether you play or you don't play, or you don't make it individually on it, but you know what I mean, you're responsible ultimately for that decision. And obviously that brings with it certain difficulties, but also when you get it right, it's
it's a leadership role, and somebody needs to be bringing that leadership. So I can see that there's an attractiveness to both of those separate roles.
Oh, 100%, yeah, and absolutely 100%. I mean, being a manager means you can probably set, you do serve to maybe set the agenda a bit more depending on the setup that you have. But I've always found, especially when I was involved with Tip, when I was coach, that there was a great deal of shared autonomy in terms of setting the way the team played and so on like that. So but being a manager definitely allows you to take your ultimate kind of plan and try to impose that on a team, for sure. I mean, you have more power generally.
Okay, and so it was a natural progression for you to become a manager, having been the coach and seen that.
Well, for me, it wasn't a natural progression, really. I mean, I came upon the manager as kind of, and I didn't even when I was coach, did ever feel I wanted to be the manager. You know what I mean? I never felt it was the next natural progression. I mean, because it's not a professional sport. Like, when I was coach, I went back and just went back to my job, and still interested in how Tipperary played, but never thought of being a manager again, to be honest with you. And then when it came up, it seemed like the right thing to do for a number of different reasons. So I was glad to do it, and really, really developed an awful lot from it myself as well. So you get something from it as well. You know what I mean? It's not all one-way street here.
So you did actually feel like you were challenging yourself and becoming...
Oh yeah, you do. Oh, definitely, yeah. Definitely, yeah. A different sort of challenge. But definitely challenging in the context of trying to imprint something and knowing that there was something gone before you, but also knowing there was something coming after you. I mean, I never saw myself as being a long-term manager, as in 10 years or 20 years. Not in the job I had. I had a short period of time. I knew I had a short period of time before real life would take over and crowd out that. But within that time, it gives you a sense of, well, what can I help with here, or what can I try to add to here, another layer. Yeah.
When I think of your teams and your vision for what the game is, we were talking to Anthony Nash a little bit earlier on, and he was making the point about the game at the weekend, is that Kilkenny are going to have to get goals. And I was like, okay, great. Explain to me how they're going to do that. And he was like, well, they need to create space, and they need to get their best forwards one-on-one in space. Yeah. I was like, okay, now how do they do that? And that's kind of what I think about. Your vision was to try and create as much space as possible for your fastest and best players as close to goal as possible. I've distilled it horribly, and I may well have butchered it, but that's what I get the sense that you spent a lot of the time of your thought about attacking play anyway. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's about getting your top players, your guy finishers. I mean, it's first of all acknowledging that there are different skill sets on a team. In a sense, even if whether you're on an elite, whether you're on a Tipperary senior team or whatever, Kilkenny senior team, not everybody is the same. Everybody brings certain attributes and they have real strengths that add, hopefully, to the collectivity of the team. But it's getting that acknowledgement that we all don't do the same job. Some of us are better finishers than others. Some of us are better to create pockets and avenues of space than others. Some people can create space more than others. Sometimes players see more than others. I think part of the coach or the manager, and the coach and the manager, is to begin to identify these players that have these attributes. And then the trick is, and the goal is, to bring this together in a performance where all the orchestra is playing their different instrument, but it sounds good when it comes out. And that's the sort of challenge, you know what I mean? And that's the way I describe it. Other people would see it, differently. But for me, it was just simply to get the finishers where they can finish, to get the guys who were collective enough to open up space if they had to get the guys on the ball that could deliver, and to get the ball to the guys that could deliver. So in a sense, you try to break it down in that very practical, functional way, while at the same time leaving it up to them a little bit. Because, if I'm, I can never see as much as somebody like Noel McGrath on a pitch. I can't do that. I'm not on the pitch. He sees it in real time. So for me to be telling the likes of him how to play the game, I'm not sure that that's my role. My role is to allow him to see the game and then play the game as he sees it, and everybody else be ready for that. I'm just using him as an example.
So how do you have those conversations to give him the autonomy on the pitch? Because it was interesting that you talked about having autonomy as a coach. You then, I think it sounds like, would like your players to feel confident, explain what the game plan is trying to do, and then ask them how we're going to do it, and have those conversations to give Noel the sense, well, I'm going to try these things, and afterwards I'm going to have a conversation about it. How do you get everybody else on the same hymn sheet, and how do you talk to him about that?
Well, it's just, I mean, part of the thing is just, as you said it there, it's part of this is a conversation. I mean, it's part of it is me having part of it is the coach having a blueprint that the players, first of all, believe in, because it's not easy to get players believe in what you're doing either. You know what I mean? They have to see and trust you. The collective, this is not any individual player, has got to see, okay, I'm prepared to go along with this, it might take a while for it to embed and so on. So there is this period where there is this, almost a guessing game. Say, well, is this going to work? Is this person really the person that can bring us on? And then you can have, once that point is reached, then you have a team saying, yeah, you know what, we think we're getting better. And therefore, it's much easier having these individual conversations then, because trust is a big element of this. And so a player feels or doesn't feel that, the first sign of trouble, you're going to abandon them. And say, well, that's not what I mentioned, this is the plan, and you weren't carrying out the plan, you've got to give players, I might agree, a high degree of autonomy, but I think most managers say that. Look, I mean, if you take the match on Sunday, there'll be times on Sunday where the players will see the problem before the coaches and the manager. And therefore, they're in a better position to pick up positions on the pitch. So let's prepare them to do that. And to react even before. I mean, there's an awful lot of talk about managers making this switch or that switch and so on. And it is important at times, and good managers can do this really well. But equally, it's important for the players to be able to take control over the game itself, and that awareness to maybe react to an in-game change in structure, or an in-game change where things aren't going the way you wanted it to be. But they must have conversations amongst themselves, Ger, as well. There's no point in, this obviously has to be practiced on the hurling pitch. But, if you're talking about space and width and so on like that, they must be able to have these conversations amongst themselves. It must be currency in the dressing room. If it's not currency in the dressing room, all the set plays you have in the world won't get it through. So
when you guys went in to that Tipperary team, when you were part of Liam Sheedy's group, was that what you're talking about, getting them on side first and then? Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
It's a natural part of the process. I mean, you have to trust it in the management team first. You know what I mean? That we all feel the reason we're here, and then that trust evolves. And in any good team, you know what I mean, there's going to be setbacks, and and your learnings from those setbacks. But it is that development of trust and that communication is central, and the sense that this is a enjoyable way of playing. Enjoyable doesn't mean nobody has responsibility. In fact, it's the direct opposite. Enjoyable means you have responsibilities. You carry out those responsibilities, you give everything for the team and for the collective, and let's see how it turns out in the end. And let's see then how your own game turns out in the end. But in a sense, that collective is the creation of the collective is the real ultimate, what you're looking for. At least when I go to see the game, like, I love individual skill, I love individual brilliance, but for me, it's also played out within a collective environment or a team environment.
And how long did it take you for the players to believe in the currency of what you were trying to do when it came to understanding space and talking about that and bringing width and not playing as individuals?
So I'd say, how long did I convince myself first? Because that's a hard job. to say, are you on the right pathway, and having the confidence that the team, the manager is confident, selectors are confident, everybody in the group is confident. Are we confident? And so it's an evolution. It's an evolution. It doesn't. There's not a. I know that some people say, I knew after this game. I know, for example, back in 2008 or league games, where I said to myself, I don't think you're cut out for this job. You know what I mean? This is not happening the way you want it to happen. What's going on here? So before you start blaming players, or you're thinking, okay, so I'm not communicating this correctly. And I suppose it's that, for me, part of it is being honest then to the players and saying, look, there's sometimes I won't get this right. So you're really good players. You're going to have to help us out here. You know what I mean? And I had lucky to have players who could do that in that setup.
That's really interesting. And actually, probably even a better question is, where did you come up with what the vision for what you wanted the team to do? Was that a reaction to what you'd seen over the previous 3 or 4 years that had been successful at inter-county level, or was it always the way that you thought the game should be played?
Well, I suppose this is always in my head, in terms of, and lucky enough, the man like Liam Sheedy, manager, and Mick Ryan, who were with me at the time, were different types of players, but they also had an idea that we needed Tipperary to be something else, and I was allowed sort of to experiment a little and so on like that. But in terms of the this was having feeling that there were players in that team that had the ability, but I suppose I always had a view that I couldn't be involved in any other way, and I only gave myself a short time really to see, could this work out? I mean, I wasn't interested in being involved just to be involved. You know what I mean? You want to try to create something, but everybody feels that. Like, you want to create something that you feel is what you think is the right way to do things.
Can I go back one step? As a player, am I right in saying you were half forward?
Yeah, I was, but. I as a player, like I was average enough player, but probably in college, in with UCD back in the days, you know what I mean. We had a really enjoyable experience where we were messing about. We had a kind of beginnings of a collective back in the end of the 1970s, 80s, when I was early 80s. Which I really enjoyed and had a big influence on me. And then I also had a big influence on my club, because my club won a lot of county finals and an Ireland club final, and it had a kind of a really strong traditional orientation. But so it gave me a sense of groundedness as well. So I felt I understood what groundedness was, and I felt I understood what I wanted to impose on that, and not lose, in a sense, the Tipperariness of what we were trying to do, where we were rooted in, what we were rooted in. And the previous generations of Tipperary teams, I grew up with hearing the names of these players, and these were all players that also, in my view, although I don't know how, imperceptibly influenced the way I thought about how the game is played. Going back to Tipperary, classical players, you know what I mean? Going back along with Jimmy Dial in my time, would have been a big Liam Devaney, these type of players, the Tipperary teams of the 60s. Although I can't actually remember seeing them play for Tipperary, because we probably only saw one game a year. I saw some of them playing club, and I would have been influenced by those players as well, and having a sense of what was Tipperary and what wasn't, you know what I mean? And what I believe what Tipperary should be. So, and then there was the kind of influence of, I suppose the revolution of the 60s and 70s, and the kind of almost soccer revolution, but also the sort of awakening of different forms of things in that, which was also, so all that just, but it had to be within a Tipperary framework for me.
Okay.
That's what I grew up with. And the language I spoke was Hurling. I didn't speak another language. I spoke English badly, but I did speak Hurling well.
And Tipperary hurling, particularly then, if
yeah, just yeah. You know what I mean? It was a language of where I lived, and a language I still love.
But obviously, you go to UCD and find kindred spirits who are interested in experimentation.
Yeah. I mean, just we were we weren't a great team, but we had. I had huge great fun on the hurling pitch. It wasn't going anywhere. But it certainly was influenced, and at the time, we were successful Tipperary minors under 21s as well, which also had, you know what I mean. But it was certainly rooted in. It was rooted in the sort of hurling fields of North Tipperary. To be honest with you, that sense of building something on an already strong Tipperary tradition.
And am I correct in saying your playing career finishes just before the Nick English Pat Fox team comes along and re-establishes Tipperary at the top tier?
Yeah, and that then would have been, the likes of Nick English come along. I was at the end of my career. I didn't end my career voluntarily, but I was fine with that. But I come that seeing those players and seeing the sort of 1980s, say the late 1980s, was really exciting for me as well. You know what I mean? It's just it's so long since Tip had won All Ireland, and I played in Tipperary teams that weren't that successful. Still still enjoyable experience, but weren't successful, and that was something really good in a sense of, say, the late, the early 90s, of Tip being through bad being glamorous again. You know what I mean? There was a sense of that, but I was busy trying to establish myself a career then, and I was just a fan.
And were you involved at all? That was the other thing that I kind of wanted to ask. It seems like it's almost a left field decision to get back involved with Tipperary at that point, but you must have been doing something at some level that Liam Sheedy was like, okay, I need somebody to be the architect of what this shared vision is. But what was your coaching CV before you got that gig?
Well, probably put the low into low key. I was doing a bit with. I was in University of Galway, and so I was doing a little bit with the Fitzgibbon team. I'm not a bit, like I did it every year, and came across some really great players, and like Sir James O'Connor would have been sort of come through there, and I would have talked an awful lot about hurling. You know what I mean? And I was still playing a bit of hurling in the early 90s, and then kind of just tangential to hurling, came back and did a little bit with my club. We'd gone back down to intermediate and to sort of coach them with my brother to win an intermediate in Tipperary. But I had no plans, to be honest with you. I had no plans. I was really getting reinterested in the game, but I had no plans to do anything like that. I got a call one day from the county chairman to know would I be interested if the right circumstances came up to coach Tipperary, and that those right circumstances would bring me in contact with Liam Sheedy, and we got on, and still do.
A very important part of that, isn't it? Having the crack with the people you actually are going to war with, and who you're going to have difficult conversations with at some stage.
I can't emphasise enough, especially how important it is to have what I would say have fun, have crack. We got to know each other, Mick Ryan and Liam Sheedy and myself, and it was great fun, even days when things were bad. You know what I mean? And we would be honest with each other. The lads would sometimes tell me, you just can't do that. You just can't. We can't do that. And they were right.
What,
know what I mean? Yeah, and equally, so they were really grounded in a sense of also a mentality, a really strong mentality, which really also I think influenced my thinking then as I went on. Because the other thing is, you have to have fun, you have to have good crack, and you have to enjoy the people you're with, but you have to be getting something from them, and they have to be getting something from you. If there's not a kind of mutual exchange there, then it becomes stale really quickly, and we had that really big time, I think. And I was also in an environment, remember that environment at the time was made up of really good people, like, Cian O'Neill, who went on then to be football and still is with Galway. Like, he was outstanding. Caroline Curran was with us, who's now with Limerick, and was also outstanding. So we were in an environment where every day going in, we were pushing each other, and at that time it was Kilkenny. Obviously, we were trying to beat, and the chase was fantastic in the sense trying to chase it down. You know what I mean? Trying to chase them down. That period was probably really, really high point, certainly in terms of the challenge was really great.
Do you remember any of the wild ideas that you had that got mixed?
No, wild ideas were binned straight away. They were so wild that Atlanta never saw the light of day.
You can keep those for the book. Come here. The chase obviously ends successfully when you stop a 5 in a row. And just looking back again at the goals, it's wild, but Lars is like, so the first goal there's somebody on him, but the other two goals, the space has been created, and I was trying to see who the hand pass for the last goal comes from, or maybe it's the second one.
It's Noel, I think. Yeah.
It's Noel. It is Noel McGrath. Yeah. It's he goes one way, Lars goes the other, and the hand pass is delivered perfectly, kind of over the shoulder, almost no look, and it's like, this is what you're talking about, where the symphony, the orchestra is playing, and the symphony sounds great.
Yeah, and that's true. That's tree play. That was a direct ball, I think, from Gerard Ryan, who's probably understated the Tipperary team, but not by me. Who moved the ball really quickly. Then it was caught by Noel, who had a decision. It was also a man moving off his left, and then Lar was in a position to move off his right in the space inside. Like, I can tell you that was never practiced as the move. That was never, we never did that in training. They did that on the day, reacting to the events that were around them. That was created in their heads through an environment that allowed it, for the manager and the rest of us. So I think there's an interesting observation in terms of, quick ball, options left and right, a genius of the delivery, and then a good finish. That to me was where good players really making good choices at the right time, and an important signal that the way we played could win big matches. Within
the framework, obviously, that is coached, which is
within a framework that where it's allowed. Yeah. And I mean, even in structuralist teams, the new structuralist models of hurling, in a sense, why it's enjoyable. Sunday's game, next Sunday's All-Ireland final is going to be really enjoyable, because Limerick, for all the way they structure their game, still allow those moments of genius to unfold from their players. And similarly, Kilkenny's evolution over the last few years has also allowed bits and pieces to open up where they're trying to break down. Everybody has their own style, and rightly so. I mean, my view is about coaching is that if you're to change the jerseys of your team, would the public recognise your team in different jerseys? If they can't, then what are you doing as a coach? Because you're probably only being a derivative. But if the public can recognise your team in a different jersey, if you put them in different jerseys, then you've got somewhere. And that to me is a real challenge for the coach. Is there something, and the manager, is there something definitive? And I always felt that both good and bad, the good days and bad days, you might recognise in the bad days as well. But the good days, you think, you know what, that's the way they play, and so on. So and I would say that about both Limerick and Kilkenny. I now would, there are elements of both those teams that are really pleasing for me in the way they try to play the game. Even though hurling is a slightly different game now than it was when we were involved. We didn't have to worry as much nowadays about structural stuff, about puckouts, than teams do now. Back then it was, we had to worry about other things, but not too much about that.
Were you as interested and as focused on how your team would defend as you were about the attacking side of the game? I mean, obviously you're coaching everything, and when you're coaching the forwards, you're coaching the defenders, you're marking them. But how do you square that, or what's the ratio in your own head about like thinking about how to create the space?
So it definitely would involve defenders, and it definitely would involve defenders again communicating with attackers. You know what I mean? And we had players who evolved their play to be really good distributors of the ball. And our view was when the goalie had the ball or when the cornerback had the ball, the tendency was ask yourself the question: is there a goal on here? And similarly, if I'm a number 15 at the far end, one of our forwards at the far end, when our cornerback gets the ball, where do I want ultimately? Where's my position to encourage him, even though he may not see you, only subconsciously, or that you're thinking, yeah, I think it's on, and therefore we can shift the ball all through the pitch. So if everybody's on message that we're going for this, then I think that a team has a chance, and I think that's most teams probably now play with a little bit of mentality like that. It's a bit slower than I like at the moment. It's a bit slower. The build-up play is a bit slower, but like it's a different. As I said, it's a different kind of. It's a more structureless game now. But the best teams are still coming up on top.
Do you think then that there's actually a potential cycle turn or whatever, evolution even, where things could be speeded up, where we could get the ball forward a bit quicker?
Yeah, I think the next phase is going to be very interesting, and so a lot of teams are seeing, like, I mean, if you I remember when I saw the Limerick half backline being named for the match against Galway, and I think they had Ger Gilroy and Kyle Hayes and Diarmuid Burns, and I just looked at that. That is shocking. I mean, how do you get the ball through that line? I mean, but I think it's a case of I mean, I wonder sometimes, are we looking at teams like Limerick, who I think are incredibly skillful team. I think they're an incredibly high technique team, as well as being everything else that everybody has identified them. So I think we have to get, if you want to beat them, you have to be more technical than go harder on your hurling, go harder on your tempo, go harder on your pace. Instead of saying, oh, we have to get big men to match them. And I'm not sure that that's the answer. And because their big men are so technically good as well, generally. So I think the next evolution will be how we can even move the ball faster and get better at control and get better at accuracy, because teams are losing games at the moment through not being accurate enough in their passing and in their scoring when they get an opportunity. Yet sometimes the temptation is to see that people are losing games because the opposition are stronger. But even if the opposition are stronger, if I'm a little more accurate and a little more technical, I think you're in with a chance. So I think you need to be clear on what sort of players you have first, what they're good at, and where you can make your gains.
So you obviously did a similar analysis of the Kilkenny team that you were chasing, which up until this point was the greatest team that we'd ever seen, or certainly in the last 50 years. What was your assessment as you were getting closer and closer to them about what you guys needed to do to finally get over the line the way you did?
Well, part of it is to have the confidence to do it. First of all, the belief system is really necessary to be strong, and commitment to what's often called, usually called now, elite play, elite systems, and what Liam Sheedy and Mick Ryan are really good at, and Mick proved later on, was in creating eliteness around a group. And I think one of the things is about that belief system, you have to draw it from everywhere, from the kit man up to your timekeeping, up to your logistics. So it is true, in my view, that you can't take anything for granted in a system. So it's not just belief that you can hurl or belief, we can do this. It's belief in everything that's around you, that you're building something that's good. You know what I mean? So I think that's really strong. But I think it's a case of being able to deliver these performances when the pressure is at its highest. And for us, the pressure was always going to be the highest when we played Kilkenny in league finals or Pedivin or Ireland finals. So it had to be that we were preparing to play our best in Croke Park. And that was certainly a strong belief of Liam's and a strong belief of mine and Mick's, that this is where we want to be able to play. And we don't want anything to interfere with it in terms of, the game, the event, or the magnitude of the game. These were irrelevancies. Should be irrelevancies. This should be a chance to perform, and so we had to work really hard at that. And then the third thing was we had to try to really work hard. I think his execution on making sure that when the chances came, that we didn't waste any. And of course we did, but we tried to minimise or diminish or reduce the amount of chances that you wasted. So going back to the technical part of your work, that you make sure your passes are on when you make them. You make sure you're putting the ball into the right spaces. You make sure that when you're shooting, they're in the best position to shoot. And you make sure that when you can't shoot, you make sure that you get the ball to the finishers who are really good. And we really used to put, because everybody knew who we wanted to finish here, and they knew their responsibilities of it. Nobody felt good or bad for them if they missed them. It happened, and it's not going to happen the next time. So it was very matter of fact.
And are you relying on a series of drills in training, or are you trying to train this in a game environment where it's very short games and short bursts, and then having a look and going, okay, we're not doing this here, this isn't working for us? When you're talking about stressing the technical and putting the technical under stress, at a training session on a wet Tuesday night, you're trying to mimic Croke Park in September, and it's very difficult to do that. But how are you actively and physically doing that? So
taking the players up I think the first part of it is taking the players up to a level where they're challenging themselves to, and you've heard this before, we've all heard this, to be the best they can be, really, really strong. But the best they can be is challenging themselves to deliver those skills in a sense, at the most intense time. So your training sessions always have to have, well, not all the time, but when it's right, have to have periods of intensity where they're being challenged to deliver these performances in a training match, in an environment that's highly technical and physical, to mimic the opposition. So that's really important. So there is a time when you really got to say you are at your maximum flow, in a sense that you're at your maximum challenge in a training session. That has to happen. Not every night, but it has to happen, in preparation. So that's certainly really important. And the other part of that is that you're challenging them also individually. So I believe in a lot of individual work with players as well. So one-on-ones where you can talk for an hour with a player and not necessarily do anything physically demanding, but to do mentally demanding stuff, of challenging that player to think about what it means to be, the phrase, in the zone, you know what I mean? And in a sense, I'm sure in your job and in my job, day job, the times you're in a zone, and the times you're not in the zone, and you're able to judge these yourself if you're a thinking person. But it's another thing to kind of force yourself to say, look, this is a really important day here, or this is a really important part of the job here. I am given this maximum attention. I am given this maximum intentionality. I am on here. To prepare your mind for that is not always as simple, I think, as we all know in our normal life. It's not always simple. But you do know when you don't do it. Yeah. And you're mad with yourself, because if somebody says to you, "Oh, you did a good job there," and you say, "Well, actually, I didn't really, to be honest. I know it. Thanks, but I know it." So it's really challenging that mentality on a one-on-one basis. And I think that's really important in a coaching environment. Time is the big thing when you're only doing it when you're not a professional.
Yeah, but even the way you're speaking there about players being in the zone, and we think of the hand pass that we were just talking about, they may not have practiced it, but they knew what they were doing as soon as it happened. Did you have a fairly standard, we need runners off both sides, and from this good things will flow, and you can practice that, and then whatever happens after that is up to them and their own individual, or have I gone down the wrong path here, and that actually what you're doing is making everybody be as technically skillful as they can possibly be, and so therefore whatever the scenario is, they've got the best skill set to deal with that, and they have to deal with each one, because it's quite chaotic out there.
It is chaotic out there. So again, going back to what we first said, it's about how you hand over that chaos, and you try to get the best decisions, and you can talk about it afterwards. You can't have players just doing their own thing either. There has to be some sort of generality in terms of how you want to play the game. But in the sense that you have routines in training where your players coming off the shoulder, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. And set plays and that, but they can only take you so far, in a sense, if you're having this communication and conversation about how we want to play, or even how we see other players. I mean, I don't say to players, well, do you know exactly everybody surrounding you? You know, are you able to compensate for the weaknesses of the players play to your right and left? Do you understand the way he likes to get the ball? You know, do they know how you want to receive the ball? Forwards will often say to you, well, sure, I'm not getting any good ball in here. But their body language might be such that there's no way they can get a good ball, because they're not turned, they're not opening up anything. So really you try to have maximum conversation and communication, that they know this is the way we want to play. Of course you have to have all the stuff around you that people say, work rate, tackling, all of that stuff is in your head as well. Yeah. So, but all of that's got to be in your head and just let out into play then when it comes to play. Like you can't be taking out the guidebook, and say, what did he say there about space? What did he say there about opening up that? I can't remember that. So it's a matter of trusting, and all of these players also will have played the game for a long time, and you're probably awakening things that other people will have said to them, and maybe they're just adjusting it or making it. So coaching is, in my view, is always a little bit derivative. In the sense that you're adding layers and layers, or trying to shift subtly thinking, but that doesn't mean that other stuff that they've learned is redundant.
Yeah, you're building on it.
You're building on layers of knowledge.
Were you coaching at Fitzgibbon the same way? Like, was that kind of the outlet that you had that allowed you to think about these things and to be fascinated by them for that period of time before you got to intercounty level?
Yeah, because I think I was, you're under no pressure. You're under no pressure, really. You know what I mean? You can just go out there. And university hurling, and still is, it's been downgraded a bit, unfortunately, by people who really don't understand the importance of it. But it's a great melting pot of ideas, and players come from different counties and clubs and so on like that, and people just want to have fun. A lot of cases, I know it's got very serious and that wanted to win it. Everyone wants to win it, but it is an element of where you're meeting a lot of different ideas. But the important point, your question there, is that if you're a coach, you have to evolve as well. So I learned very quickly, as the player you have in front of you improves, if you don't get better, then they'll outgrow you. And in a sense, you have to be coming back to them all the time with something that's challenging all the time, and that's the key, really. And that's sometimes very exhausting. I found it definitely really exhausting in terms of the challenge it gave to the coach as well. You know what I mean? How do you keep getting the best? How do you keep telling them that this is new? because you have to be doing that. Because they're challenging you back because they're good normally, you know what I mean, at top level.
Yeah. And so I know you said you speak the language of hurling. Are you attuned to other sporting revolutions or even other fields of thinking that you're bringing to the hurling field?
Yeah, I think so. And I think most of us are, you know what I mean? Even going seeing, but not only in the technical side, you know what I mean? But on the even the sense of whether different coaches, different managers, say in football or soccer, how they're allowed creative players to flourish, and the tension all the time between the brilliant player I remember in my time Rodney Marsh. I used to love Rodney Marsh at Queen's Park Rangers. You know what I mean? I was only getting this through shoot and goal and all those things, but I still like his hairdo. But it's these brilliant players that everybody said, yeah, well, they were brilliant, but he could never play for England or something because he just didn't understand the game, So you're trying all the time to see, well, how do players like that handled it? And also then you learn from basketball about blocking and creating space and stuff like that. So you learn an awful lot from looking at other games and looking at people who have achieved great things, how looking at players and trying to how players like Ronan O'Gara and how he handled really playing a pressure situation as a number 10 for Ireland, and was such a dominant personality, and yet he always looked frail to me in the context of the game. And that took some doing, in my view, all the time. And it transformed that he's now become a successful coach. And I'm always interested in that. You know what I mean? That somebody who's able to keep calm in that environment and direct games, that there is that's interesting. So you do learn so much from other sports, for sure.
And beyond, one of the reasons that the main trigger for getting in touch was the passing of Milan Kundera. And I remember we were at an event one time and you talked about the unbearable lightness of being to describe your forward line. And I was like,
and he died.
He did.
Milan Kundera, yeah. Yeah, and so look, you just get sense of, when you're coaching. Well, for me, when you're coaching the game, and the game in this case, hurling, when you're coaching, you do get the opportunity also to chat to people, and especially, in my case, young men, and I think it's an opportunity for a lot of, for really to sort of to allow them to develop in terms of what they want. You know what I mean? Because it's their moment. It's not my moment. It's their moment on the pitch. It's their moment of self-expression. And that self-expression can be preventing a forward scoring a goal. You know what I mean? That moment can be a denial of the expression of somebody else. It doesn't always have to be the guy who's ever scored the goal. But I think it's allowing people to feel, this is where I perform. This is where I belong. This is what I want to do. And you just want to try to create an environment that's as good as you can. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah,
and I suppose that kind of expression is, that kind of expression is really important to me for if you like for human beings.
And how do you find that expression now?
That's an interesting question that is still being answered. I'm still interested in the game, but also, I find, for example, at the moment, if you want to know my interest, I'm sort of interested in the tour and the cycling. Okay, so I got started cycling there recently. So now I'm interested in sort of what the Vinegar and Pogacar and that battle. And it's not a battle anymore. It's over, I think. But and I know all the questions that surround sport and cycling and so on, but I kind of disregard that, and I try to see the sporting environment and see what goes into that. I mean, I watched the Netflix stuff on the tour last year, the Netflix 8 series on the tour last year, there just before this tour started. And even that begins to interest me in terms of performance and in terms of, in particular, I know this is a kind of long-winded answer to your question, but what particularly interests me was, for example, the role of the domestique in cycling, and how everybody gives up something for somebody else. And you give up for your leader here, and you turn up, and then you're exhausted, and you fall away, and he wins the race or keeps his spot in the general classification. And that sense of, for me, going back to what we started, that sense of the collective, that sort of giving for others, I'm still fascinated by that element of, whether it's hurling or any sport, that watching the women's game yesterday, the World Cup game yesterday, and so on. That sense of giving, that sense of wanting to give for something to happen. In their case yesterday, there's something big happening, bigger than the game itself happening at the moment for girls, for young girls in soccer, for example. That's going to evolve. I'm hoping to something big. It's bigger than what they're playing in. It's much bigger than the game yesterday. And you can sense that some of them are aware of that. And it's that sense of going beyond yourself is really, really important. And that's why the cycling appeals to me, and the role of going back to the cycling, the role of the general domestique, the person who just gives, knows what their job is, but does their job to the absolute maximum. And they're never going to be the star, but without them, there'd be no leader, or there'd be no winner, and that to me is still an enduring. Objective for me in sport, or even in public life.
And would you ever go back to being involved at intercounty level, do you think?
Well, I'm retiring officially at the end of this year, so maybe when the dust settles, but I probably unlikely. And in any case, I'd have to see a team that would be of interest.
Right. That's not a no.
Not a no, but I'm running out of time.
We didn't even talk about the game properly at the weekend. Is there an obvious winner in your head at the moment?
Well, there's not. There is obviously Limerick seem to be an obvious winner, but I think they've yet to hit top form this year. If they all hit top form together again on a day that matters, I think they'll win. But I do respect hugely the Kilkenniness of this team being built on a kind of a change, slight reorientation, even begun when Brian Cody at the end of his career, and he's still kept and tried to identify a different way of playing, because they had been so boxed for years, and to see them try to play a different game, but also to keep that element of what really made them to be a super team. That sense of never ever giving in, that sense of belief in how they play the game. That you talk about learning, you know what I mean? Seeing them up close, I learned so much of the importance of that ethic, in a sense, and we learned so much in Tip, I think, as well from that, and tried to take that on as well. But yeah, so I see Limerick winning, but I won't be one bit surprised. And given that they have, if Kilkenny won it, given that they have, they still got 5 or 6 what I consider to be high quality players. Start with their full back, they're starting with their goalkeeper, full back, really good. One centre field, really good, and centre forward or half forward, really good. Inside you have TJ and Cody. So you have 6 or 7 players that would be what I consider to be a high level, and you have 8 or 9 players then that really are work and that Kilkenny way that would be outstanding. So yeah, Limerick I think, but not surprised Kilkenny.
Well, listen, enjoy the game at the weekend and the rest of the tour as well. It's always brilliant to talk to you. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time.
No problem. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a million. That's Eamon O'Shea there giving us his thoughts on a career and a life in hurling. Hurling, it's anyone's game. Off the Ball is teamed up with the Senior Hurling Championship sponsors Bord Gáis Energy to uncover stories highlighting the positive impact that hurling has had on people's lives. For full competition details, please visit bordgaesenergy.ie/BGEGAA.
Hurling on Off the Ball
with Bord Gáis Energy. Hurling, it's anyone's game.